The crash of wood against concrete split the night like lightning. I shot up from the couch, heart pounding, and before I even reached the front door, I heard the groan-me grandpa's voice, raw and pained, cut off by the bark of a woman's shrill command. I swung the door open to a nightmare. My 81-year-old grandfather lay crumpled on the porch, his cane snapped in two, his trembling hands raised as two men in cheap tactical vests towered over him. Behind them, smirking like she had just staged a grand performance, stood Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA president, obese and puffed with pride, her hands on her hips as if she owned the very ground he bled on. "This property is non-compliant," she screeched, pointing a stubby finger at the flower beds Grandpa had planted with aching hands last spring. "We warned you, old man. Unauthorized landscaping. Now the HOA police are here to enforce the law." HOA police. The words were so absurd it made bile rise in my throat. There was no such thing. These weren't officers, they were two hired thugs with dollar store badges pinned crookedly to their vests, pretending to carry authority while doing Karen's dirty work. My grandpa, a man who had survived combat in Korea, was being manhandled like a criminal on his own porch. And Karen was loving it. I saw red. My hand went to the small safe by the entryway, the one Grandpa insisted I keep armed since he knew danger doesn't knock it kicks. My Glock 19, loaded and legal, slid into my grip like it belonged there. By the time I stepped onto the porch, my voice had already cut through the night. Back. Away. From him. Now. The two imposters froze, eyes darting to the pistol leveled steady in my hands. Karen, however, threw back her head and laughed, a grotesque sound that made my stomach twist. "You wouldn't dare," she sneered. "This is HOA jurisdiction. Put that toy away before you get arrested." But her words only fueled my fury. I stood firm, my voice steady, every syllable carved in stone. "This is my house. That's my grandfather. And the only people about to get arrested tonight are standing in front of me." My grandpa groaned, struggling to sit up, his face lined with pain. But then, with that stubborn fire still burning in his old eyes, he whispered, "Don't give an inch, son. Not to bullies. Not ever." The neighbors were awake now, lights snapping on, doors creaking open. Whispers grew into shouts as people saw the scene unfolding: an old man on the ground, two fake cops cornered by a veteran's Glock, and Karen basking in the chaos she had created. Phones were out, cameras flashing, voices calling out. What's going on? Are they even real police? She's gone too far this time. Karen tried to regain control, waving her arms dramatically. "Everyone stay back. This man is unstable. He's threatening HOA officers with a gun." But the words landed flat because the truth was already obvious. The fake badges gleamed under the porch light, cheap and laughable, their vests unmarked by any real department insignia. And then came the twist that turned the tide forever. From across the street, Mr. Alvarez, the quiet retiree who rarely spoke, stepped forward. He carried himself differently tonight, his back straighter, his eyes sharper, a glint of authority in his gaze. "Those men are not officers," he declared, his voice booming with unexpected weight. "I spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor. Impersonating law enforcement is a felony. I suggest you two drop the act before you add 20 years to your resumes." The thugs faltered, exchanging panicked glances. Karen's face twisted, her composure cracking. "He's lying," she shrieked. "He's just some old man." But Alvarez reached into his coat and pulled out his retired DOJ identification, holding it high. The crowd gasped. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now cheered, their voices emboldened by the revelation. "Fraud," someone yelled. "Lock her up," another cried. The tension snapped as the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Someone had already called 911, and this time it wasn't Karen controlling the narrative. Within moments, 3 squad cars rolled onto the street, red and blue lights flooding the scene. Real deputies stepped out, hands on their holsters, scanning the situation with professional calm. I lowered my Glock immediately, hands raised to show control, the barrel angled safely down. "Weapon secured," I said loudly, my training as a veteran kicking in. The deputies nodded, their eyes locking instead on the imposters and Karen. "You three, hands in the air," one barked. The fake cops stammered excuses, but the deputies moved fast, cuffing them before their nonsense could spread. Karen, however, screamed bloody murder, kicking and thrashing as the officers grabbed her arms. "You can't do this. I'm the president. I have power here." But her cries only fueled the crowd. Neighbors who had lived under her reign of fines and threats for years now shouted back with unfiltered rage. "Not anymore. Your power's gone, Karen. You hurt Grandpa, you witch." The deputies shoved her into the back of the cruiser, her protests muffled behind the glass, her empire reduced to a pathetic echo in the night. I crouched beside Grandpa, lifting him gently to his feet. His hands shook, but his smile, faint and stubborn, was the kind that comes from surviving battles you weren't supposed to win. "Told you," he muttered through the pain. "Never give an inch." The Glock rested heavy at my side, but in that moment, I realized the true weapon hadn't been steel, it had been courage, the refusal to bow to tyranny. As neighbors rallied around us, the once divided street stood united for the first time. And I knew this was only the beginning of Karen's downfall. The patrol cars pulled away with Karen still screaming in the back seat, her face pressed against the glass like a trapped animal. The two imposters sat cuffed in separate cruisers, their heads hanging low as the deputies read them their rights. The night air carried a strange electricity, a hum of release as neighbors stood together, whispering and filming, their voices laced with equal parts outrage and relief. For years, Karen had lorded her fake authority over us. But tonight the truth was undeniable. She had crossed a line so bold, so reckless, that no one could look the other way again. The next morning, the headlines lit up every local news outlet. HOA president arrested with impersonators after assaulting elderly veteran. Neighborhood tyrant brought down by Glock and courage. Clips of the scene went viral online, Karen shrieking, the imposters fumbling, neighbors cheering as deputies slammed the cruiser doors. For once, the story wasn't about her winning, it was about her losing spectacularly, publicly, and permanently. My grandpa, bruised but unbroken, sat in his recliner watching the coverage with a smirk. "All these years I fought wars overseas," he said, shaking his head. "Never thought the real battle would be on my porch." His words stung with irony, but there was pride too, pride that our stand had sparked something bigger. Within days, investigators uncovered everything. The two HOA cops were contractors Karen had paid under the table, promising them community enforcement powers that didn't exist. She had ordered fake badges online, even gone so far as to draft HOA violation warrants on stolen letterhead. It was organized fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, harassment, and elder abuse all rolled into one. And with Mr. Alvarez's testimony as a retired prosecutor, the charges stuck like iron. The trial was nothing short of explosive. The courtroom overflowed with neighbors, veterans, reporters, and cameras. Karen shuffled in, shackled and bloated with indignation, still trying to play the role of victim. She pointed at me and Grandpa, shrieking, "They threatened me with a gun. They're dangerous." But the jury wasn't buying it. The video evidence, captured from half a dozen angles, told the real story: Karen orchestrating a midnight attack, fake cops shoving an elderly man, and me stepping out with a firearm drawn only to defend my family. The prosecution dismantled her defense piece by piece. They played the porch footage. They showed the fraudulent badges. They read text messages Karen had sent to the imposters, instructing them to make an example out of him and drag the old man out if he resists. Gasps filled the room. She wasn't just guilty, she was monstrous. But the moment that sealed her fate came when Grandpa himself took the stand. He stood slowly, leaning on a new cane the neighbors had bought for him, his voice shaky but unflinching. "I served this country so people like her could have freedom," he said, his finger trembling as he pointed at Karen. "And she used that freedom to dress up crooks and try to steal our dignity. That's not leadership. That's tyranny." His words cut through the silence like a bayonet, sharp and final. The jury returned in record time, guilty on all counts. The judge, stone-faced, delivered a sentence that drew gasps and cheers: 5 years in state prison for conspiracy and impersonation, restitution for Grandpa's medical bills, and a lifetime prohibition from serving on any HOA board. Karen collapsed into her chair, her shrieks echoing through the courtroom, but no one pitied her. Not after what she had done. The imposters fared no better, sentenced to prison time for impersonating law enforcement. Their faces plastered across the news became a warning. Don't ever let greed and arrogance turn you into someone else's weapon. Afterward, the neighborhood transformed. Without Karen's iron grip, the HOA dissolved overnight. In its place, neighbors formed a community circle based on respect, not fear. We held our first meeting on Grandpa's porch, the very ground where Karen's empire had crumbled. Kids played tag in the yard, veterans saluted one another, and for the first time in years, laughter replaced whispers. Deputy Ramirez, who had responded that night, attended in plain clothes, smiling as he told us, "What you've built here is what real community looks like. No fines, no fear. Just neighbors taking care of neighbors." His words became the motto of our new council. The most powerful moment came a month later, when the community organized a block party in Grandpa's honor. They unveiled a wooden sign, hand-carved by a neighbor, placed at the entrance of our street. Burned into its surface were the words, "This is a neighborhood, not a kingdom. Freedom lives here." Grandpa's eyes watered as he ran his fingers across the letters. For a man who had fought in foreign lands, this victory, this stand meant just as much. Karen's name became a cautionary tale, a story told with both anger and humor. Parents whispered it to kids as a lesson about arrogance. Strangers online shared it as proof that tyranny always falls. And though she sat behind bars, raging against the world, her legacy wasn't power, it was her downfall. As for me, every time I holstered my Glock at the end of the night, I felt no pride in the weapon itself, but in the choice I made to stand firm, to protect, to refuse to give in to fear. Because that's what Grandpa had taught me all along. Bullies only win if you let them. So I'll leave you with this. When someone like Karen abuses fake power, when they dress up lies and badges and try to crush the innocent, what is true justice, the prison sentence they receive, or the unity that rises when people finally stand together? Right or wrong, I know one truth. The night Karen's fake cops attacked my grandpa, we found our strength and we never gave it back.